Shana Tova. This is my first high holidays as a rabbi. I was only ordained a few months ago. And so in order to prepare for this moment, there's been one book that I've been reading over and over again to get me ready to serve this community. It's a book that has been even more helpful for my preparation than reading the Talmud. And that book is The History of Park Avenue Synagogue. As it turns out, I learned from this book that 2025 is the anniversary of a number of noteworthy events. This year is the 100th anniversary of the synagogue buying the plot of land that we're sitting and standing in today, eventually leading 2 years later to the move from Park Avenue to Madison Avenue. This year is also the 30th anniversary of our annual Mitzvah Day. And perhaps more importantly, or most significantly, it was in 1965, 60 years ago this year, that the synagogue made the momentous decision to start serving Kiddush lunch after Shabbat services. Which means that we're also celebrating 60 years of people complaining about the bagels. As long as there have been Jews, we've been complaining. Kvetching is core to our Jewish identity. We're not afraid to speak up when something is bothering us, a feature that we find all throughout the Bible. Think of our Israelite ancestors who wandered the wilderness for 40 years and moaned about the food and the traveling the entire time. Think about the prophets who constantly condemned the unjust societies that they were living in. This tendency goes all the way back to the first Jew, Abraham, the hero of our high holiday Torah readings. He's known as Avram HaIvri, the Hebrew, but Ivri literally means the one who stands on the other side of the river, meaning the other side of the consensus. When God tells Abraham that God will destroy the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham doesn't sit back and accepts it. He protests. He interrupts what God is doing and challenges the morality of God's decision-making. What if there are 50 righteous people in Sodom? Will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? What if there are 45 or 40 or 30 or 20 or even just 10? Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? And in response to each of these interruptions, God accepts the premise of Abraham's protest that it is not right to destroy the innocent in pursuit of eliminating the wicked. This uniquely Jewish personality trait of protesting, of complaining, of kicking up a fuss, is so central to Jewish identity that it birthed a unique tradition, one that was a core event of Jewish life for nearly a millennium. Unfortunately, in the 20th century, rabbis led a concerted effort to eliminate it, so now this tradition is almost totally unknown today. I only learned about it a few years ago when I happened to turn to a page I wasn't assigned in an 800-page Jewish history textbook. But ever since I learned about this custom, which our ancestors knew and loved, I haven't been able to get it out of my head, and I feel that if we all learn about it, and perhaps even bring it back, we can rely on it as a tool to meet this significant and complicated moment. The tradition is called Ikuv Kria, which literally means delaying of the Torah reading. In the Mizrahi world, Jews in Arab lands would refer to it as tze'akah, crying out. On Shabbat or holidays in the synagogue, just before the Torah was unfurled and ready to be read, someone would stand up and run up to the bima and declare that they were invoking Ikuv Kria, that they were the victim of an injustice that needed to be resolved right then and there by the community leaders in attendance. Just like the Passover Seder cannot be finished until the Afikomen is found, the service cannot be finished on Shabbat until the Torah is read, and this protester would not let the Torah be read until their complaint was resolved. At various times throughout history, Ikuv Kria would be invoked for all sorts of reasons, to protest the rising cost of kosher meat, or demand that the community do more to support Jewish soldiers who had been drafted against their will into the Tsar's army. One record we have from 11th century Cairo describes a woman who was abandoned by her husband, invoking ikuv Kria to get the community to force the man to fulfill his obligation to financially support her. "Community of Israel," she said, "I cry out to God and to you over the injustice. And I ask the head of the community, may God strengthen him and protect him to do me justice." Imagine the bravery that it took for this woman literally 1,000 years ago to cross the threshold separating the genders in her synagogue and declare that she was stopping everything until justice was done in her name. Would you have the courage to do that? Is there an issue that would make you take these steps to demand that the world stop in its tracks and listen to your protest and take action in response? As Yafa Eliach describes in her book, There Once Was a World, a 900-year history of the shtetl of Aishashak, after ikuv Kria was invoked, there would be a consultation period where the rabbi, the synagogue trustees, and other communal leaders would huddle together at the eastern wall to discuss the issue. The community, for its part, was eager to show itself worthy of the trust placed in it, and there was much heated debate among its members, much movement back and forth between small clusters of people taking sides and offering suggestions, and a constant flow of traffic as men made their way to the eastern wall to give their recommendations. Once a decision was reached, the Gabbai Rishon, the president of the synagogue, would mount the bima and make a public offer on behalf of the community. If the offer was acceptable to the plaintiff, the reading of the Torah would resume. If it was rejected, the whole process would begin anew, with the community remaining hostage to the plaintiff's dissatisfaction until some kind of agreement was reached and services could be resumed. End quote. Suffice to say that services are not done this way anymore, which is understandable. It's very disruptive. One 16th century writer, Rav Ephraim Lunchitz, complained that the ikuv Kria protests and the negotiations and the comments by the people in the pews about whether that particular ikuv Kria was justified or not, all of that had gotten so raucous that non-Jews would go to shul on Shabbat as spectators. A concerted effort by many rabbis eventually led to the tradition dying out in the 20th century. The rabbinic question of whether to allow or suppress ikuv Kria is really a question over two competing values. On the one hand, we want to enjoy services. We want our Shabbat or Rosh Hashanah experience to be pleasant and predictable and not too long and not to be held hostage to one person's haranguing. As Rav Lunchitz wrote, who is the plaintiff holding up? He's holding up the creator of the world by not giving praise to God until the leaders do what the plaintiff wants of them. On the other hand, we have the mitzvah of pursuing justice. And the steps that are taken by Jews to ensure and enact justice are often disruptive and argumentative and full of chutzpah. No matter the social issue, it's impossible to imagine that the steps that must be taken to repair our world do not include some form of disruption to the status quo, some form of protest. Because if Abraham could protest even God's decisions, then we can certainly protest other human beings. The Talmud teaches us that anyone who had the capability to protest the wrongdoing of members of their family and does not protest is held responsible for their family's actions. Anyone who has the capability to protest the wrongdoing of residents of their city and does not protest is held responsible for their fellow residents' actions. Anyone who has the capability to protest the wrongdoings of the whole world and does not protest is held responsible for the whole world's actions. From this, we can learn the teaching of the rabbi and civil rights leader Abraham Joshua Heschel. In a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible. It's not just that we have the right given to us by the First Amendment or the example of Abraham to protest injustice. It's that we have the responsibility to do so. not to scream into the void or to share a post, but to make sure that your protest, your righteous call to action, is heard by people in a position to actually listen and change things in response to your rebuke. You must be willing to go, if necessary, all the way to the rabbi or the mayor or the CEO or whoever is in the position of ultimate authority, even if that means that others are inconvenienced along the way. The challenge is that these types of leaders have very busy lives and are protected by staff whose only job is to prevent people from disrupting their schedules, let alone convincing them to change their strategy or approach to the issue. That's why the biggest lesson that we can take from ikuv Kria is that when you are confronted with injustice, your response should be taken from the central story of a different holiday, Passover, and more specifically, from my favorite of the 10 plagues, the plague of frogs. Have you ever wondered about the frogs? I think about the frogs a lot, which probably says a lot about me. But the frogs are the only plague that doesn't make sense. All of the other plagues are natural disasters or disease outbreaks or damage to the food and water supply, things that are actually dangerous. And then there are these frogs. They're not venomous toads. They're just normal frogs. So how are they a plague? One midrash explains that it was the frog's sound that plagued the Egyptians. But it wasn't just the croaking and ribbiting all night long that was such a bother that Pharaoh was temporarily convinced to let the Israelites go. It was that, according to the midrash, the sound of the frogs was a tse'akah, a great cry. And tse'akah is the same word to describe the cries of the Israelites that God heard when God decided to send them Moses as a rescuer. In other words, what was so torturous to the Egyptians is that they had ignored for so long the cries of the Israelite slaves, but when the frogs came on the scene to give a great cry alongside them, to echo and amplify their voices, to give support to their righteous cause of freedom, the Egyptians could no longer ignore it, unable to maintain their cognitive dissonance to justify the injustice that they were responsible for perpetrating, responsible either because they were directly implicated in slavery or because they had never protested against it themselves. And so it makes sense that the Mizrahi community's term for ikuv Kria was also tse'akah, the same word as the great cry of the frogs and the great cry of the Israelites. Disrupting services to protest an injustice used the same template as disrupting the Egyptians to protest the enslavement of the Jewish people. And moreover, the rabbis teach that the cry of the frogs not only affected the Egyptians, but also educated the Israelites, who had been convinced by centuries of enslavement that speaking out had no effect, but learned from the frogs themselves about the power of protest. As Rabbi Dina Weiss writes, though it is dangerous to remain stuck in a mode of complaint, sometimes we need to be willing to make some noise. The first step of emancipating ourselves from our slavery was to complain of the pain and indignity of being enslaved. End quote. In other words, crying out like the frogs not only can give a voice to the voiceless, assuring people that they have allies, it can also inspire them to stand up for themselves and assert their rights even more strongly. Look, I am new here. I am very aware that I am a rookie rabbi. And I have been given the advice by people I greatly respect that I should learn the melody of the synagogue before I start singing my own song. But you should know that there are issues in this country and in Israel that I feel very strongly about. Suffice to say, I worry that both places are quickly going down a dangerous path. I welcome the opportunity to speak with you after services and in the days and weeks ahead about ways that we can support each other through the difficulties of this moment. But I'm also very aware that the struggles that animate me may not be the struggles that animate you. And it may even be that on some of these issues, we're standing on opposite sides of the river. But even if that's the case, I feel that I must tell you that it is incumbent upon you, because it is incumbent upon all Jews, to protest when you see people acting in opposition to your understanding of Jewish values. It is a mitzvah, a holy commandment, to actively disrupt proceedings, to let those responsible know that they are wrong and that things must change. In this broken world of ours, each of us must have one issue for which we must be willing to stand up in the middle of everything and say, the world must stop until I've said my piece. So my question to you is, what will you speak out about? And what will you be willing to disrupt? If we end up on the same side of the river, as I hope we do, I know your voice will strengthen mine, as I hope mine will for you. And even if our efforts fail, at least the world will know and God will know that we did not stand idly by and did not remain indifferent. And we can be heartened by the idea that we've given strength to those who weren't brave enough to join us this time, but might do so next time. We should learn from Abraham that our protest should be directed to the person or entity who can actually bring about the change you want to see. And we should learn from the system of ikuv Kria that you can't just make inflexible demands, you have to be willing to negotiate. But we should also learn from the frogs that when confronted with injustice, the time to speak out is always now, before you croak. On this first day of the new year, a time for new beginnings and new opportunities, I encourage you to take time today to think about where and when you'll be willing to take a stand. Because after all, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. Shana Tova.
Thank you for joining the Park Avenue Synagogue family. I hope you enjoyed the sermon. Please consider supporting our online community by scanning the QR code or by going to supportpas.org or by making a donation. Shalom and see you in Shul.